Behind every headline are the fates of people and families forever affected by a fatal mistake or accident. In this issue, we respectfully recount the largest plane crashes and how the aviation world is trying to prevent them from happening again. Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, crashed on the 12th of June 2025 near Ahmedabad, India, an event that shocked the world and prompted a review of safety and emergency preparedness standards. This international flight attracted attention not only because of the number of victims, but also because of the scale of the rescue efforts and the coordination between airports and regulatory agencies, which worked under intense emotional pressure and a lack of operational information. At the crash site, emergency teams worked around the clock to organize the evacuation, search for survivors, and provide first aid. Medical centers in the region mobilized additional resources, and civilian volunteers helped unload humanitarian aid and supply the victims with essential items. In the first hours after the tragedy, the authorities established special corridors for rescue vehicles and declared a state of emergency in the surrounding areas to prevent further panic and ensure access for equipment to the crash site. Initial reports from various sources were contradictory, as is typical for disasters of this magnitude. There were discrepancies regarding the flight route, weather conditions, and data exchange between control centers. The international community expressed its condolences and willingness to help, resulting in the arrival of aviation accident investigators and consulting engineers from several countries to work alongside Indian experts. The technical investigation included examining the wreckage, reconstructing the flight parameters, and analyzing the data recorded on the flight data recorders. In parallel with the technical investigation, psychological assistance was provided to the victims and relatives of the deceased. Hotlines, support centers, and psychological rehabilitation groups were organized, as the scale of the tragedy required a systematic approach to the long-term restoration of the emotional state of the survivors. Public discourse raised questions about the maintenance cycle for this type of aircraft, the control of crew training, and the regulations for responding to abnormal situations in the air and on the ground. Experts discussed possible improvements in the monitoring of the technical condition of engines and onboard systems, as well as the need for stricter control over the adaptation of international standards to the specifics of regional infrastructure. The carrier and the authorities had to quickly develop an information policy to minimize the spread of rumors and inaccurate information, while the media and social networks actively published eyewitness accounts, video clips, and interviews with relatives, which placed an additional burden on the investigating authorities and required careful verification of the facts. Legal proceedings related to compensation for losses and moral damage were initiated in several jurisdictions. The families of the victims sought compensation and justice, and international aviation organizations offered mechanisms for coordinating payments and support. The investigation lasted several months and involved international experts, engineers from corporations, and regulators. The black boxes were delivered to an independent laboratory where flight parameters and crew communications were analyzed in detail. At the end of the preliminary report, the experts made a number of recommendations for modernizing engine and flight control system maintenance procedures, as well as tightening control over the technical condition of aircraft. The families of the victims and survivors received support not only from the state, but also from public initiatives, international foundations, and aviation associations, which organized fundraisers to cover emergency medical and funeral expenses and provided legal assistance in obtaining compensation. The incident subsequently prompted a review of a number of protocols at airports in the region. New procedures were introduced for recording and checking the condition of aircraft before departure, fuel and material quality control was tightened, and requirements for crew training in simulated, rare but critically dangerous situations were increased. In the political arena, the incident became the subject of discussion at the highest levels, with public promises of reforms and investments in civil aviation infrastructure plans to create additional emergency response centers and to modernize air traffic control systems. Local communities suffered the consequences of the disaster for a long time. Hundreds of volunteers participated in the recovery efforts, entrepreneurs provided material assistance, and aviation industry associations organized roundtables and conferences to exchange experiences and develop coordinated measures to improve safety. In the months following the tragedy, scientific and engineering journals published articles analyzing what had happened, with detailed reviews of the aircraft's design, features, and suggestions for improving maintenance procedures, which contributed to the accumulation of knowledge and the prevention of similar events in the future. Memorials were erected in memory of the victims, and funds were established to support their families. Jeju Air Flight 7C-2216 on a Boeing 737-800 crashed on the 29th of December 2014 near Muon Airport in the Republic of Korea. This incident became one of the most discussed aviation tragedies in recent years and sparked widespread public debate. There were passengers and crew on board, traveling on a regular route between cities within the country. The flight was approaching for landing in difficult weather conditions with low clouds and strong winds, which complicated the work of the crew and air traffic control. Eyewitnesses report a loud sound and a bright flash upon impact with the ground, followed by a fire and intense smoke. Local emergency services arrived at the scene as quickly as possible, organizing rescue corridors for equipment and medical teams. Volunteers and airport employees were also involved in the evacuation and provision of first aid. The victims were urgently transported to the nearest medical facilities, where additional beds were set up and additional medical personnel were mobilized. Regional authorities immediately set up a crisis headquarters to coordinate efforts to deal with the aftermath and support the families of the victims. Hotlines were opened and temporary accommodation was organized for relatives arriving from other regions. The international community and aviation organizations expressed their condolences and offered assistance in investigating the incident. Aviation accident investigators and engineers from neighboring countries arrived to work with their Korean colleagues. First and foremost, investigators focused on collecting debris, marking it, preserving it, and analyzing it to reconstruct the flight dynamics and identify possible technical failures or piloting errors. The flight recorders were retrieved and sent to a laboratory for decryption of parametric data and crew communications. This information became key to understanding the chronology of events and drawing preliminary conclusions. In parallel with the technical investigation, significant attention was paid to providing psychological support to the victims and relatives of those who died. Crisis support groups were organized with the involvement of psychologists and social workers. Legal assistance was also provided to help with compensation claims and communication with the airline. As the investigation progressed, public debate arose about the level of crew training, operating procedures, and maintenance of aircraft. Aviation experts pointed to the need for a detailed review of the maintenance history of the specific aircraft and compliance with regulations by the air carrier and airport infrastructure. The airline's management immediately announced its cooperation with the investigation, providing all requested documentation and launching support programs for the families of the victims. The country's civil aviation regulators promised to conduct unscheduled inspections of the fleet and to strengthen oversight of compliance with safety standards, which contributed to the start of a review of certain procedures related to technical condition checks before departure and crew training on simulators. Local communities and volunteer organizations actively joined in to help clean up the area and support the victims. Post-construction services coordinated the restoration of infrastructure. There was public discussion about the need to invest in the modernization of navigation equipment and the improvement of early warning systems for adverse weather conditions. Scientific and engineering circles initiated research on adapting aircraft maintenance methods to the climatic characteristics of the region and on the introduction of new safety protocols. As a result of the incident, recommendations were made to strengthen control over flight management systems and power plants, as well as to improve information exchange procedures between dispatchers and crews. Against the backdrop of mourning for the victims of the event, this incident became a stimulus for professional dialogue in the aviation industry, aimed at increasing reliability and preventing similar tragedies in. The memory of the victims is honored by their relatives and the public. Memorial events were organized, and specialized funds provided support to families in matters of treatment and restoration of the social status of the affected citizens. Services and volunteers are thanked for their promptness and courage shown in the days when it was necessary to join forces to save human lives and learn lessons to improve aviation safety in the interests of all passengers and crews. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight J28243 on an Embraer E190 aircraft crashed on the 25th of December 2024, while attempting an emergency landing in the vicinity of Aktau in the Republic of Kazakhstan. This incident caused a wide international response and prompted rescue services and investigative authorities in several countries to take action. Emergency crews, firefighters, medical personnel, and search and rescue units arrived at the scene within minutes of the crash and organized urgent evacuation and rescue efforts. Local authorities declared a state of high alert and mobilized additional resources to hospitalize the injured and organize the reception of relatives of the victims. Eyewitnesses and passengers reported an explosion-like sound and damage to the fuselage before the collision with the ground, which gave rise to the theory that the aircraft was hit by ammunition fragments. However, investigators worked with several possible theories, including equipment failure and a bird strike. A more complete understanding of the course of events was facilitated by the recovery of the flight recorders, which were sent for decryption and detailed study by international and national experts. During the rescue operations, some of the survivors with serious injuries were urgently hospitalized, requiring coordination between medical institutions in different regions to provide specialized treatment. This incident attracted the attention not only of law enforcement and emergency rescue agencies, but also of the diplomatic departments of the countries whose citizens were on board. Active coordination began for the repatriation of bodies and the provision of consular assistance to the relatives of the deceased. At the same time, active information work and evidence collection work was carried out at the crash site. Fragments of debris were carefully marked and recorded, characteristic damage was analyzed, the locations where parts of the structure fell were geolocated, and telemetry records were studied. The flight and its maintenance history were also the focus of the investigation. Experts checked documents on the latest technical inspections, maintenance schedules, and scheduled repairs. As a result of the initial investigations, recommendations were made to strengthen safety measures when flying over areas of increased military activity and to improve information exchange procedures between air carriers and air traffic control services. This incident once again raised the question of how to ensure safe corridors for civil aviation near conflict zones and the role of international mechanisms in such situations. The surge of public interest and emotion was accompanied by massive volunteer activity from local communities who helped with the delivery of humanitarian aid and support to the families. Airlines and regulatory authorities began unscheduled fleet inspections and reviewed protocols for crew preparedness for emergency situations. Simulator training was intensified, and additional pre-flight aircraft inspection procedures were introduced. At the political level, the events led to diplomatic statements and calls for a transparent and comprehensive investigation involving international experts. In the following months, interim reports and technical conclusions were published, which analyzed the data in detail and proposed measures to reduce the risk of similar events recurring. Memorial services were held in memory of the victims, and initiatives were launched to support the families of the victims, while the professional, the aviation engineering and piloting community actively discussed the lessons learned from this tragedy with the aim of improving the reliability of civil aviation and protecting the lives of passengers and crews in the future. Vopas Flight 2283, an ATR-72 aircraft, suffered a serious accident on the 9th of August 2024 while performing a regional flight, and this event triggered a large-scale rescue operation, the involvement of emergency services, and the organization of a comprehensive investigation with the participation of national and international experts. The aircraft, which was operating on domestic routes, was approaching for landing in changing weather conditions with gusty winds and low clouds, which significantly complicated maneuvering and required a high degree of concentration and precision from the crew. Witnesses described moments when the aircraft experienced noticeable fluctuations during descent, followed by a series of sharp corrections and an unexpected loss of altitude, ending in a collision with the ground and a subsequent fire. Fire engines, medical teams, and search and rescue units immediately arrived at the scene and organized corridors for the passage of equipment and the evacuation of victims. Hospitals in the surrounding regions set up additional wards and called in staff to provide emergency medical care, while local authorities set up a crisis center to coordinate efforts and liaise with the victims' relatives. The airline announced its full cooperation with the investigation and provided all requested technical documentation on aircraft maintenance and crew training, while international organizations offered assistance and sent experts to participate in the analysis of the causes of the accident. Investigators focused on retrieving the flight recorders and decoding the telemetry, as this data would allow them to reconstruct the sequence of events and identify possible system malfunctions or crew errors. At the same time, a frame-by-frame analysis of the wreckage and a study of the nature of the damage were carried out, as well as a review of the aircraft's maintenance history to rule out or confirm the possibility of mechanical failure. The investigation also considered external factors, including possible collisions with birds, foreign object debris, and the impact of weather conditions on aerodynamics and engine performance. Hotlines and psychological support centers were set up for the victims and their families, and volunteer and charitable organizations joined in to deliver humanitarian aid and provide support on the ground. The professional community began discussing the need to enhance crew training, expand scenarios for practicing rare emergency situations, and tighten requirements for pre-flight check procedures. Regulators announced unscheduled fleet inspections and a review of certain operating protocols, including those for engine and flight control system maintenance. Interim reports by investigators made recommendations to improve information sharing between air traffic control and crews, upgrade meteorological equipment at regional airports, and strengthen oversight of maintenance regulations. The incident prompted the introduction of additional safety measures in small aircraft and the improvement of emergency response procedures, while public initiatives to help families rehabilitate and restore their living conditions kept the memory of the victims and survivors alive. In parallel with the technical analysis, active work was carried out in the legal sphere. The families of the victims and those who died received legal support to file for compensation. Airline representatives entered into dialogue with stakeholders on issues of compensation and assistance to victims, and legal mechanisms included both internal procedures and international practices for resolving such situations. Aircraft and power plant manufacturers brought in their engineers and specialists to participate in expert assessments and consultations in order to work with national authorities to identify design or operational factors that require attention. During the document and service history review, aviation experts carefully analyzed maintenance records, inspection logs, and previous flight reports to determine whether regulations had been followed and whether any comments indicated increasing risks. At the local community and volunteer initiative level, the mobilization of assistance continued over a long period of time. Material support was provided, fundraisers were organized to cover emergency medical and funeral expenses, and long-term social rehabilitation programs were created for those affected. Analysis of the collected material contributed to the development of specific recommendations aimed at reducing the likelihood of similar incidents. Recurring and formed the basis for decisions on modernizing equipment and strengthening staff training, with many of the proposed measures targeting small air transport operations, where resources and standards often require additional attention. As a result of the incident, industry discussions and